2025 Afcon qualifying is officially a wrap. Congratulations if your team has qualified. Commiserations if your nation hasn't made it and let you down. The good news is whether your team makes it or not, we'll all be able to watch the greatest tournament in world football. What I want to do for this video is the day after the qualification campaign has ended. I wanted to do a detailed breakdown on a team by team basis and look at the 24 teams and see who are contenders, who are just solid middle teams in tier two, and the tier three of teams that should probably just be there to make up the numbers. We'll do all of that after the introduction. Hello and welcome to another episode of the African Football Roundup on the African Five-A-Side podcast. I'm your host, Meher Yassin Mizahi. This podcast is brought to you by africasacountry.com. This week on the website, we have two pretty cool articles. One of them is called Not Exactly at Arm's Length, which looks at the South African arms industry and how, despite the fact that South Africa claims to be and is really a defender of the Palestinian cause, they need to do a better job of keeping track of the arms that they export, because some of them, apparently, according to some rumors, might fall in Israeli hands. And the other one, called Liberation is Not Propaganda, about some of our African countries being perhaps a little too attached to the energy industry. If you haven't this week as well, this is another pretty significant mosque announcement. Subscribe to the Africa as a Country YouTube channel. I'm going to put it in the description below. We're going to be much more active on there. And we're even going to have a short documentary about the CAF Champions League final last year. I went there to cover it for this channel. And when I was there, I spoke to ultras from the Al Ahli Sporting Club, Ultras Ahlawi, and I sort of spoke to them about the history of their fan group, and you learn a lot about fan culture in North Africa. So it's going to be a really cool short documentary. I'm going to post a 1-minute preview right now so you can watch it for yourself. And if you like it, go to the Africa as a Country YouTube channel, subscribe there, because it's going to be released before this new CAF Champions League campaign starts next Tuesday. So do go subscribe over there, tick the notification bell. I highly recommend that you do. In North Africa, it is said that the spectacle isn't on the pitch, it's in the stands. In May, we went to Tunisia to cover the African Champions League final between Esperance de Tunis and Al Ahli, but also to learn more about how North African supporters are generating world-class atmospheres by fighting for one another in and out of the stadium.
People will go out of their way to get a special visa to go to Tunisia, travel to 3 different countries, sacrifice a monk's wage just to come to this game. It means something more. It's something unique. It's not just your average away day.
الأهلي هنشجعه حتى لو في آخر الدنيا.
ملك افريقيا النادي الاهلي ده اللي احنا بنهوى في بالي الاهلي ليه بروح
So I'm very excited to share that documentary with you guys, maybe over the weekend, maybe sometime early next week. But now that we know that all 24 teams that have qualified, let's go through them one by one and speak about their road to Morocco over the last 3 months and what we can expect from them in maybe 12 to 13 months' time. And so what I've done is I've broken all 24 teams into sort of a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 for me is teams that have the player quality to win the tournament, coupled with either very good coaching, maybe they're a superpower of the past. They are teams that we can realistically expect to make, let's say, the top 4 or the top 8 of the 2025 AFCON. The second group, tier 2, are teams that perhaps they have a lot of good quality, but there's something that's not functioning, whether it's at the federation or at the coaching level, or vice versa. Maybe they don't have the player quality to really expect them to be favorites, but at the same time, they have really good coaching or a really good organization at the federation level, and that gives them an advantage as such, but we can't really put them into tier 1. And finally, tier 3 are teams that, they're just like kids on a field trip, heading out there, doing the best they can do, trying to inspire their nation with some positive performances and go as far as they can. So the first team, by the way, this is an order. So the first team, the team that I consider the utmost favorites at the 2025 AFCON, this should be a surprise to absolutely nobody. It's the hosts, Morocco. They're the only team that went 6 for 6. They won all 6 matches, albeit many of them, 5 out of the 6, were at home. But check this out. They also scored 26 goals. That's more than any other team during this AFCON qualifying campaign. Second place was Algeria with 16. They scored 10 goals more than anybody else over the last 3 months. Um, I even went further than that and looked at the history of qualifying campaigns all the way back to 1957. And I can tell you that Morocco has scored more goals in this qualification campaign than any other country has in the history of AFCON qualifying. Second place was Algeria again with 25 goals in 2017. So this is absolutely historic. Nigeria, I think, had 22 a few years back, but this is historic. The amount of goals that they're scoring is very, very impressive. Um, in addition to them scoring 26 goals, they were scored by 10 different goal scorers. They also have the leading goal scorer of the qualification campaign, Brahim Diaz, the Real Madrid attacking midfielder, with 7 goals scored. Um, and where we are today for Morocco really is a long ways away from where we were at the end of the AFCON. It seems like forever ago, but it was really just at the beginning of this year. At the beginning of this year, they lose to South Africa in the round of 16. In the round of 16. Um, and there's a huge amount of criticism against their coach, Walid Regragui. He's too rigid. We just play a 4-1-4-1. He doesn't want to change maybe the players that took him to the semifinals of a World Cup. Basically, it's this similar criticism to what we had of Jamal Belmadi of Algeria. Same system, same players, and teams have they're wise up to it now, right? And what he's done over the last 8 months is absolutely remarkable. He's brought in a bunch of new players. Many of them have been blooded in from the Olympics team that won a bronze medal. Um, but not just them. For example, the left back Adam Asnil from Bayern Munich, Brahim Diaz from Real Madrid. I don't know any other team on the continent that's doing that. So props to them. Hats off. Um, we have those questions about the home field advantage and does that inflate some of these accomplishments? In my opinion, it does, but just slightly. And in any case, they're going to be playing the AFCON at home anyways. So yeah, Morocco is, in my opinion, the absolute favorites, and I don't think many people can argue against that. Second place in the power rankings, another team that I consider a favorite is Cote d'Ivoire. I spoke to a few Ivorian friends over the last few days. They're very happy with Emers Faye, and especially with how he's injected new blood into this team. Uh, there have been occasions where a few of the senior members of this Ivorian team, uh, maybe they're not playing with their club, maybe they're not in good form with their club, and he hasn't hesitated at all to bring in new young players. And Cote d'Ivoire, like Senegal, are one of those teams that just keeps on creating nonstop talent at the academy level. Um, Emers Faye, as we spoke about with Salim a few months ago, one of his main strengths, in my opinion, at the AFCON and even after the AFCON, has been the fact that Cote d'Ivoire, he does a good job of making in-match substitutions and adjustments, and those usually work and have an impact on the match. Um, my only point of concern for Cote d'Ivoire this time around is that they lost 2 out of their 3 away matches. They lost to Sierra Leone and Monrovia, and they lost to Zambia in Lusaka. Um, they really trying for that last match in Lusaka where they were already qualified and there was a lot of player turnover. That can be excused. And even when they went to Sierra Leone, qualification was practically, bagged already. So I'm not too worried about that just yet. I want to see how things look next year during World Cup qualifying, but that's something to keep an eye on. But Cote d'Ivoire, hey, reigning, defending African champions. Again, I don't think anybody can argue against it. I would just say that I want some of their best players to continue to remain in form and continue to represent their national team and score goals for their national team. Players like Sebastian Aller and Simon Adingra were amongst the best players in the knockout stages of the last AFCON. They haven't really been playing consistently for Cote d'Ivoire since. So Seko Fofana, another one that missed this last window. I want to see their leaders, their top players, playing continually because sometimes I feel like there's almost too much turnover for Cote d'Ivoire. Senegal, look, we had a lot of questions about Senegal because after the first 2 matches of this AFCON window, AFCON qualifying window, remember Aliou Cissé's contract is not renewed. They bring in an interim manager, his assistant coach, Pape Thiaw. Pape Thiaw starts hot. They score 4 goals against Malawi. but they didn't really score so many goals in his next three matches. So he's 4 for 4, 4 matches, 4 wins, 8 goals for, 0 goals against. So they only scored 3 goals in their last 4 wins. Or the only last scored 4 goals in their last 3 matches. um, Mathematics. So after the match against was it? It's not Malawi. Who did they play against? I forget who they played against in their last match. But he said in the pre-match, post-match press conference, "Of course, I want to continue if I'm offered the job by the Senegalese Ministry of Sport. But I'm a Senegalese soldier. I'm ready for the challenge, and I'll do what the authorities decide." People also asked him, "Is your style of play sort of more offensive than Aliou Cisse?" And he said, "It's too early to talk about my style of play. All the credit has to go to these great players that I'm surrounded with." That really is Pape Thiaw, like soft-spoken. Players love him, very humble. And I was personally impressed with, especially what he did in Algeria with the African Nations Championship, when they came here with a very young squad and took on teams like the hosts, Algeria, who had a very experienced squad, and they managed to impose themselves and their style of play. So I think most Senegalese journalist fans, players are thinking and hoping that Pape Thiaw will take over. I do believe that he will be taken over. Um, my questions then for him is, will he be able to extend the prime of Sadio Mane, Kalidou Koulibaly, Edouard Mendy, some of those aging warriors? And can he get the young players to step up and reach that level of those aging warriors? Players like Lamine Camara, Ismail Assar, for example, has been very, very disappointing, including under Pape Thiaw. Um, we can throw Iliman NGA in there. I want to see some of these younger Senegalese players step up and be as good as the previous generation. So that's what he's going to have to do, sort of negotiate the older generation and the younger generation, and how he's going to oversee that transition, which is something that Senegal's had to really juggle with over the last calendar year. Number 4 on my list. I think this is gonna be hype. Number 4, Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal. We're talking about, three or two of the last two Afcon champions, plus a semi-finalist of the World Cup. Who's number 4? South Africa. If you look at the form, if you look at the quality of player, if you look at the coherence of the way they play football, I think I'm gonna put South Africa here. It's like one of those. I think a lot of South African fans are. You know that meme of Meek Mill on social media where it's like, "I used to pray for times like this." I think a lot of South African fans feel that way because it over the last 15 years, so disappointment after disappointment for Bafana, and finally they get to the third place at the AFCON in January, and the way that they've played over this last, especially the last 3 months, I think has been very, very good. Um, Going to Uganda, getting that victory against a tricky Uganda side, and then coming home against South Sudan. I know it's just South Sudan, but this didn't really feel like a test where we could evaluate South Africa. This felt more like a celebration of South Africa in 2024. Not almost 900 passes against South Sudan, 82% possession. I don't care that it's just South Sudan. That's impressive. And hey, great atmosphere in Cape Town. Like the entire lower bowl was packed. You could tell the players were having fun with the way they were celebrating goals in front of that crowd. I need to see South Africa continue to get crowds like that for the South African national team. So this didn't really feel like a test. It felt like a celebration of 2024. Nonetheless, Ikram Reyners got his goal, and I think he's probably the number 9 you're looking for now. Maybe when Lyle Foster is not playing. Do you even really need a huge aerial threat, anyways? I mean, that's the argument for Evanes Makopa, but the way South Africa plays football with the ball to feet, I'm not really sure you need a player like Makopa in there. So I think Reyners could be the solution going ahead. Tapela Morena, Aswina over these last 2 matches in November have scored a lot of points as backup wingers, in my opinion, if you want to call them backup wingers. Um, and now I think, look, South African football can focus on club football. I'm told that Hugo Bruce spoke to the head coaches of various clubs and that things are smoother now in terms of there was always conflict between some of the biggest clubs in South Africa releasing their players and Hugo Bruce, who wanted them, and the clubs didn't want to release them. So I hear things are smoother now. It seems like the fans are in communion with the national team. Hey, like, I have to put them 4. So they need to separate in World Cup qualifiers in March. They need to keep that in the back of their mind, but they can focus on their club football for now. And I think they can put away a very impressive 2024 for Bafana. Number 5 is going to be Egypt. Uh, Another team that perhaps after the Afcon we didn't expect them to be here, but this was a first real extended test for Hussam Hassan over the last 3 months, and he passed with flying colors. Um, he was a coach that was brought in to sort of cut costs, local coach, domestic coach, but I think he's done a good job, especially as a man manager, giving players time off to stay with their clubs if need be, playing them in the positions that they want to play in, experimenting with different formations. And I think he can do a lot of what he does also because he was the player that he was, one of the greatest players in African football history. The Egyptian Federation is also very well equipped, decently funded. And so I really like Egypt. The defender, Amir Rabia, in my opinion, was probably one of the best players over the last 3 months for them. They have Mohamed Abdel Monem currently making his way playing in Europe at Nice. Defenders are good. They have experience everywhere. Midfielders are good. I think the real question for me is can they find the right chemistry, the right formation, especially along that line of attack? Because who has a better attacking line of players than Egypt? Maybe you could just argue Nigeria with Boniface and Osimhen and Lookman, but Omar Marmoush, Mohamed Salah, Mahmoud Trezeguet, Mohamed Mustafa is really top notch. It's up there with the best on the continent. So Egypt is number 5. Number 6 is Algeria, my country. Here I'm factoring in the fact that there's going to be tens of thousands of Algerian football fans in Morocco when the Afcon rolls around. This was a qualification campaign of Algeria. I would call it an experimental one. They played their 3 home matches in 3 different stadiums. They used a whole bunch of different formations. They played, I think, almost 3 dozen players, if I'm not mistaken. It's definitely more than 2 dozen players. Um, Different formations, at times playing with, a 4 at the back, at times playing with 3 or 5 at the back, defending very well, 4 clean sheets out of 6. That was a big focus for Vladimir Petkovic when he came here. The team is still very much in the making. There's no clear starting 11 just yet, but you could tell that there's something brewing under the surface. And I don't like to talk about feelings and vibes, but there is a lot of calm and serenity that has returned to Algerian football since the end of the AFCON, when the Algerian footballing scene was very much split into two: pro Jamal Belmadi, anti Jamal Belmadi. And it was like, how can we fire our coach that's done so much for us? And people were booing and whistling in the stadium because they wanted the return of Jamal Belmadi. And now it's like he managed to get 16 points out of a possible 18, Vladimir Petkovic, during these qualifiers, and nobody has anything to say now. We're waiting for the big test to truly judge him, but he does things with a smile on his face. He's very soft spoken, very polite, shakes hands with everybody, very diplomatic. And I think Algeria sort of needed that, and that's going to do good for everybody on the Algerian footballing scene. 3 more teams that I consider tier one: Cameroon. And Cameroon, I would have put them even higher because I've said this so many times on the show that I really think that Cameroon have one of the best starting 11s in African football. Definitely top 5, maybe top 3. I think Mark Brice is actually a decent coach, but they went through this entire qualification campaign in the midst of a footballing civil war between the FA and the ministry throughout the qualifiers. And Samuel Eto'o was the loser of those battles. Now, the question is, has he lost the war? Because even for the very last match, the coach comes out and says, I feel like people are not happy that we've qualified. And he's, I think, hinting at Eto'o and his clique and his crew. So every time the team comes here, some players are being put under pressure to follow Samuel Eto'o, others are, to the coach. You can't go to Morocco in 13 months' time and have these same issues. And I'm placing them this high up, assuming that they're not going to have these issues a year from now. Maybe I think one of the two are probably going to have to go. It's probably going to be Samuel Eto'o. I don't think anybody from the Ministry of Sport can be can be ejected. But my thing on the pitch is that they probably need to find just their third midfielder. They play that 4-3-3. They've played it for several years now. They have Andre Frank Zambo and Gisa. They have Carlos Baleba. Who's the third one? Is it Eno, who had a decent qualifying campaign with those long shots? I think he scored against Kenya. Is it Ongla? Is it Kunde? Is it someone else? That's what I'm curious about for Cameroon. Fix the administrative issues, make a few adjustments on the pitch, get the country behind you, and they can really challenge, in my opinion. 2 more teams, which maybe we wouldn't really traditionally consider them tier one in African football: Angola and DR Congo. And these are 2 teams that I put together at the end of tier one because for me, it's almost the exact same analysis. These are teams that went to the quarterfinals of the Afcon back in January, and they just stayed with their stability. They kept the coach, Sebastian de Sabre and Pedro Gonçalves, respectively. They kept practically the same starting 11s, and they just stacked positive victory after positive victory, increasing momentum. These were two of the teams that I think had 12 points after 4 matches of qualifying and had secured two of the first teams that secured their qualification, even when others like Cote d'Ivoire, for example, hadn't. So there's not much to say here, just that I like the continuity. They just have to be careful to not let things get stale. That was the problem with Morocco, as we mentioned, post World Cup 2022. That was the problem with Algeria around that time as well in 2022. So it's one of those things where stability is good, but probably in cycles. You have to be very vigilant and see if things start to take a downturn, you have to act quickly. So Angola but I don't anticipate that happening, especially for Angola, because a lot of their players are very young. Like the wingers, they're electric. Milson, Zito Lovumbu, Gilberto, Gelson Dalla, Zini as a striker. Uh, these are like, yeah, very exciting players. They're just 21, 22. They want to make an imprint. They don't have that ego yet. So I don't anticipate that happening, particularly with Angola. DRC has to be a little bit more prudent. Let's move into tier two. So yeah, I think maybe some of the teams that didn't make tier one might be a little bit angry, but hey, tier two, I'm going to start with Burkina Faso, who one of those teams that had 12 points after 4 matches, like Angola and DRC, and wrapped up qualification quickly. I dropped them into tier two because I was really worried about what I saw in November, just a few days ago. Um, they lose to Malawi 3-0, and they lose to Senegal, which is okay, but they lose to Malawi 3-0. To be fair to them, they had a few injuries coming into this international break. No Bertrand Traore, the striker Mohamed Konate also picked up an injury, the winger Dango Ouattara, and the goalkeeper Hervé Kofi. But still, there's no excuse to lose 3-0 to Malawi if you're Burkina Faso. Good news for Burkina throughout this calendar year post AFCON is that Lassina Traore, their striker who plays at Shakhtar Donetsk, finally healthy, and he put in almost an entire calendar year of football. He's not scoring goals at the pace that he used to, but I think that's going to come along now. He just needs to stay healthy because they need a target man. They were really lacking that at the AFCON, in my opinion. The other thing they were lacking, in my opinion, was perhaps a little bit of creativity. And I always wondered if Burkina, like Cameroon, they always play a 4-3-3, but I was wondering if maybe when you have a player like Stefan Aziz Ki, that I think everybody that watches, the interclub competitions, they recognize how great he is. Uh, Put him maybe in the pocket in the number 10 position. If you do that, you might. The thing is, I think it's one of those where it's either Bertrand Traore or Stefan Aziz Ki, because neither of those track back or defensively. They're both very ball heavy players. They don't like to make runs so much. Um, and Traore, he's sort of a number 10 on the wing, but Aziz Ki is more of a central attacking midfielder. Me personally, I'd rather play a 10. I'd rather play Aziz Ki and maybe drop Bertrand and have Dango Ouattara and maybe Hassan Bande as runners down the wing. The other thing one of the reasons why I put them in tier two as well, I don't know much about their coach, Brahma Toure, Traore, sorry. But Burkina Faso, they always rock up with these random, uncles or fathers of players, like last time, Coach Malo. And I don't know what to make of them because I don't watch, local Burkina Faso football. And usually they're decent, but I don't think they're good enough coaches to, make a team more than the sum of its parts and really mount a run at the AFCON. Next, I have Nigeria. I'm gonna say I'm hating again, but I think they're gonna be very disappointed with their November window as well. And the problem is there's been instability since the AFCON at the coaching level for Nigeria. I just wish that they extended Jose Peseiro, or that they made a decision and went, for example, with Augustin Eguavoen, and don't stop making him an interim and an emergency spare tire every single time. Just give him the job, man, or find somebody else. Overall, throughout these qualifiers, I noticed some poor defending on the individual level. Defending set pieces again, they conceded the first goal against Rwanda on a set piece, and we talked about them again against Benin doing the same thing. Is that a coaching problem? Is that an individual problem? The defenders themselves? I don't know because again, a coach hasn't really had a chance to work with a little bit of peace of mind. Um, but yeah, to be fair, like the goals that Rwanda scored, they were very difficult to defend against, in my opinion. But like Egypt, like Algeria, like yeah, maybe Senegal as well. Mostly Egypt and Algeria. I think Nigeria have the problem of can they get their best players on the pitch at the same time? Because so many of their best players have different profiles and thrive in different systems. Can you get Boniface, who was disappointing against Rwanda, Osimhen, Lookman on the pitch at the same time? Maybe you can in a diamond with Lookman as a sort of, like a secondary striker behind those two. Um, where does Iwobi fit in there? Do we care? Uh, Me personally, I'm sick of the Iwobi experiment in midfield. I'd rather see him on the wings. But yeah, I think that's a problem that a coach that has a lot of time can perhaps ponder and try to find a solution for. But that's the main problem for Nigeria. Find yourself a coach that you can trust, and you have 4 months to do it now because you're behind in World Cup qualifying and you need to catch up and make up ground quickly because there's only 6 more matches. We're almost halfway there. Burkina Faso, Niger are the first two teams in tier 2. Then we have Comoros, and Comoros are a team unlike Burkina and Nigeria. I, the problem here is player quality. I think they do a great job at the federation level and at the coaching level. And it's not that the players that they have are bad, because the vast majority play either in the second division of French football or the first division in French football, and they've done a really good job recruiting. Because for those that don't know, Comoros, they have I think 200,000 Comorians living in France, and most of them living in the Marseille area. And so because they have such a huge diaspora, they call upon these players, and they're really really good players. But you have players like over the last 3 months, these are some of the players they've recruited. Zaidou Youssef, we spoke about him. He's been man of the match for, I think, for both matches in November. He's currently playing in Portugal, but he came through the French ranks. Rayan Lutin, an attacking midfielder. Warmed Omari currently plays as a defender for Lyon, 24 years old. These are all young Comorians, born and raised in France, that Comoros FA just sort of recruits. And that's what they've done a really good job doing, is stability with the coaching. They just had 3 coaches in the last 10 years, I believe. They play mistake-free football when you watch them. They're very hard to break down. They don't score a boatload of goals, but they don't need to because they don't concede almost any goals. So they're winning matches 1-0, 2-1, but it's enough. And they're doing a great job in World Cup qualifiers, and they finished top of the group in Group A. So Comoros are here to stay. This isn't a flash in the pan. They have a lot of, like I said, good young talent. The federation seems to be well run. They make good decisions at the coaching level. Now the question for them is, can they do the impossible at the World Cup qualifiers and qualify to a World Cup? That would be truly remarkable. But I don't doubt that they can, just simply because they make you beat them. They're not going to beat themselves. Under Comoros, we have Mali. Mali under Tom Saintfiet. Don't look now, but I think Tom Saintfiet's doing the right things with Mali. He's been in charge for 6 matches. They're undefeated. They've conceded just 1 goal. And that's one of the things when you talk about like Ghana and the catastrophe that they're in. How do you turn things around? My opinion, don't worry about winning quickly to sort of assuage the fans. Just worry about not conceding. Stack little victories, even draws, 1-0, 0-0, and he did that. 6 matches undefeated, just conceded 1 goal. It wasn't much, and then the floodgates opened in this last match against Eswatini, and they win 6-0. And it was that front line of Kamori Doumbia, El Bilal Touré, and Nene Dorjelas. Very, very good young attacking line that has maybe the potential to be like Nigeria's or Egypt's one day. But one thing I like about what Tom Saintfiet's doing, and I think this has been a problem for Mali in the past, is he's getting all of his best players on the pitch at the same time. At times, like you would watch Yves Bissouma, for example, always be on the bench, and I understand that he wasn't always fulfilling his defensive duties, but Yves Bissouma, in my opinion, you can't leave him on the bench. He's just too good. And Tom Saintfiet went to him and he gave him the captain's armband. And this is something that reminds me of what Walid Regragui did to Hakim Ziyech when he came to Morocco. Remember, before Walid Regragui, they had Vahid Halilodzic, who was really at odds with Ziyech and almost at war with him. And what do you need? Sometimes you need a coach to come to you for those players that have not character issues, but they have strong characters. The coach needs to come to them and say, look, I know, what's been happening. I trust you. I need you. When you tell one of those players you need them, you know, you give them more responsibility, and sometimes that can bring the best out of them. And I think that's what Saintfiet's done. Very intelligent in my opinion, on his behalf. It's emotional intelligence, giving him the captain's armband, again, putting his best players on the pitch, especially in attack. Sometimes it's not that obvious. Like we said with Nigeria, for example, they can't get Boniface on the pitch because they can't find perhaps a suitable formation that's coherent. But Mali's been able to do that over the last two windows, and I think that's a very positive sign for them. Underneath, we have Mozambique, who I'm not gonna I didn't spend too much time watching them, but it's practically the same players from the Afcon, players like Dominguez, Reinildo, Jenny Katamo. And if you look at Chiquinho Conde's record over the last really over the last 18 months, it's been they beat the teams that they have to beat. They don't lose the matches that they're not supposed to lose, like Comoros. And so you have to give them a hat tip. And yeah, I think they fully deserve their spot here. And all the way down here, we have Tunisia. That's tough. All the way down in tier two, almost in tier three. And Tunisia, they had four total coaches this calendar year. They started the year with Jalal Qadri at the Afcon, Muntasar Louhishi after, Fawzi Benzerti starting the Afcon qualifiers, and they finished with Qais Yaqoubi. The Tunisian Federation is still in a normalization committee, and so they can't really pull a trigger on a well-known coach. Um, Tunisia has not missed an AFCON since 1994. I wasn't expecting them to miss this one, but my goodness, this was probably the worst qualification campaign I've seen from them in a very, very long time. They have some okay young talent. They have some decent defenders and midfielders, but I've never seen less attacking quality for a Tunisian national team than this current one. It's pitiful the amount of the strikers and the attacking wingers that they have, in my opinion. Like it, there's a short-term fix. It's not going to be something that's going to fix all the problems, but you can go and recruit French Tunisians like Comoros does, like Algeria does, like Morocco does. Go to your diaspora. You have players like Ismail Gharbi, he's like a PSG prodigy, he's now playing in Braga. You have players like Youssef Chermiti, the player that plays for Everton, who's I believe half Portuguese, is he half Portuguese, half Tunisian. Haysam Hassan is like half Egyptian, half Tunisian. These are all like young players with very high ceilings that you can come perhaps bring in alongside players like Hannibal Majbri that can change things, inject a little bit of energy to an adrenaline shot to the arm. But they can't really do that until they have a functioning federation. And as a result, the fans are just completely out of it. They seem like completely fed up. And you're gonna have to build up that enthusiasm from the fans before you head to Morocco. Otherwise, you really have no shot. Rolling along, I'm gonna have Sudan next. Sudan, they jump tier three and they're immediately in tier two, and I think that's because they have a lot of we spoke a lot about them on this channel, but Miracle Run under Kwesi Appiah, the fact that they're gonna have so much motivation politically, I think is important. The emergence of key leadership in certain players like Ramdan Ajab, Mustafa Mohammed, the goalkeeper, Karsham, the defender, Mohamed Abdulrahman is a striker, Walidin, Pogba, Khidr in midfield. These are very experienced players. They've played in AFCON in 2021. And so I really like Sudan are another team that's going to make you beat them, like Comoros, like Mozambique, and I think that's why I have them in tier two. Um, just keep in mind that they did struggle with transition, defending the transition with pace against Niger. That match is not going to go away in my mind. I don't think that was just a blip on the radar. I think Niger exposed certain weaknesses for Sudan, but we'll see when the World Cup qualifiers roll around. They have two very important ones in March, I believe, against Senegal and I forget the next one, but the Senegal, oh, South Sudan. So South Sudan, they're playing, I think, at home, and I think they're playing both matches at home in Libya. If they can beat South Sudan, which they should, they'll have 13 points. And then if they can beat Senegal, now we're really cooking with gas. Now they're gonna have 16 points. Senegal wouldn't have more than 11 with only 4 matches left to play. So I think all eyes now are on March. They got to start preparing that now, 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 now. Excuse me. The last team I have in tier two is Benin. I've been really impressed with Benin. Gernot Rohr proving that he's a good coach, in my opinion. He's been on the continent for a while. He's did a decent job with Nigeria, but he's, in my opinion, really proving that he's got it. Um, I like the young attacking talent in players like Junior Olayton on the wing, Duku Dodo in behind the striker. Good leaders in Saturn and Alagbe who missed some time during these qualifiers, the goalkeeper, Mohamed Tijani, the center half, Steve Mounier as a number 9. I really, really like the kind of leadership that he's shown, particularly in this last match. Benin went to Libya needing to not lose. I think they could have lost 1-0, but needing to not lose 2-0 in Libya in front of a packed crowd, very intimidating atmosphere. Um, and they managed to pull it off. I was very impressed with that performance, 0-0. That was a huge mental test in Libya, and I think those are the matches that your young players learn from, that you as a group can sort of put in your locker, and the next time, let's say they qualify to Morocco, which they have, and they have Morocco in their group, and they're gonna have that kind of atmosphere in Morocco. You can draw on some of the lessons you learned in a match like this against Libya. Um, so, for example, this match against Libya, they had less possession of the ball, expected. They had more chances, more shots on goal, more big chances. So, very expertly managed that match. And they're an underrated side simply because they missed some of the few Afcons. I really like Benin, I think, as a tier 2 side. Um, yeah. Tier 3, I think a lot of the East Africans are not going to be happy about this, but I have Uganda, and I like Uganda because this feels like a new team. We spoke about, with Senegal, the importance of transitioning between the older generation and the younger generation, or maybe mixing in some older players with some young players. Uganda does this to perfection. They have some very young attacking talent behind the striker on the wings. Travis Mutiaba, who was at Zamalek. I think people know him. I think he was at Bordeaux recently. Was he at Bordeaux? I know he was at Zamalek last year, but smaller, left-footed attacking midfielder, very creative, as is Alan Okello, who has a similar profile. Rogers Mato on the wing. These are all like under the age of 21, 22 years old, and they've chipped in with very important goals throughout this qualification campaign. Their left back, Aziz Kayondo, I think is same thing, 21, one of the most underrated young talents in his position, in my opinion, in African football. Bombs down the wing, great crosses, even does like these fake cross shots that go in the goal every once in a while. So I like Uganda, and then they have like the maturity of like a Khalid Aucho in central midfield, Beavis Mugabe as a center half, Ismail Watanga as a goalkeeper. These are players that are 31, 28, 29 years old, and they've been in, AFCONs before. They played perhaps in 2017, they played in 2019. So I really like the mix of young generation and new generation that Uganda has, with a coach in Paul Putt, again, that's experience on the African continent. He's been in charge for 13 matches, and he's beaten practically everyone that he has to. He has 4 losses in those 13 matches, and those were to Algeria, South Africa, Comoros, and Guinea. None of those were embarrassing losses. When it comes to those tier 2, tier 3, beat the teams that you have to beat. Don't lose the match. Don't beat yourself. Don't lose the matches that you're not supposed to. After Uganda, I have Tanzania. Tanzania, they saved their best for last, though. They came in clutch for the 5th and 6th match day, defeating Ethiopia and Guinea. Um, and they have some young talent like Novatus Moroshi, like Clement Mzize, who are cool. But what I've noticed really from watching the highlights, to be fair, I didn't watch too much of the full matches, is that when the going gets tough, they rely on their experienced players. Mbwana Samata, Simon Msuva scored some very important goals. Mudathir Yahya in midfield, Faisal Saloum in midfield. Their best players, their most experienced players, played the best when it mattered the most. And that's what I think they're going to have to continue to rely on and lean on until, well, definitely until the AFCON. But my question is, will these players last until 2027? That's just, I know that has nothing to do with this video, but, somebody like Mbwana Samata, who's 31, and we're in 2024, in 2027, he's going to be 34 years old. Will him and Msuva, who's also 31, will they be able to keep up and play at that high of a level until then? That would be very important for them to do. Equatorial Guinea, because of course they're hosting 2027 AFCON, if you didn't know, one of 3 nations. Equatorial Guinea after Tanzania. I was fairly disappointed with Equatorial Guinea after being impressed with them at the AFCON. They started AFCON qualifying precariously, missing Emilio Nsue, of course, who was deemed ineligible to play for Equatorial Guinea almost 10 years after he made his debut for them. But they missed him and one of their other best players, the midfielder Ibn Salvador, throughout these qualifiers. Not throughout, but for most of them, for Ibn Salvador. They struggled to score goals. They just had 5 goals in the 6 matches. And even in the summer, they had 1 goal in 2 World Cup qualifiers. And they're still a team that's tough to break down, but the toothless attack is what's really given me reason to pause. And on top of that, away from the starting 11 and the personnel, some of the things I didn't really like so much. The pitch in Malabo was honestly pockmarked. It was disgusting. And of course, your team's not going to score a lot of goals if you have a pitch like that. And I sense just a little bit of decrease in momentum with Equatorial Guinea. Their style, I think they're a good tournament team because they can frustrate teams. They can win matches 0-0 or 1-0 on a penalty shot. Um, still can't believe they beat Cote d'Ivoire 4-0 in that final group stage match. But I think they're a good tournament team. But man, like sometimes watching them in qualifying is horrible. So I'm gonna have them here. I really think that they're decreasing in my opinion. After them, I have Gabon, and Gabon is again like an aging side. They were the best of three bad teams in Group B after Morocco, in my opinion. And some of the defending against Morocco was absolutely atrocious. Now they still have a quality front three. They're experienced: Denis Bouanga, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and of course Jim Alavina. Mario Lamina is still playing Premier League football in midfield. Gaylor Kanga has a lot of experience as well. But man, they need to improve their set piece defending urgently. They have aging center halves. They're missing a general in defense in the mold of, a Bruno Aquile Manga in his prime, or Didier Ovona as a goalkeeper. And another thing with Gabon in general, I mean, in previous AFCONs, is do they have unity? Because I remember, man, in Cameroon in particular, that was like one of it was weird because the star players were treated differently than the rest of the team, but still they had decent unity under coach Didier Cisse, I believe. That was a very curious team because on one hand you had like Lamina and Aubameyang lambasted in the media, apparently not necessarily liked by certain players or certain media outlets or certain journalists. Um, Remember they got caught like with tested positive for COVID, sent back home for apparent heart lesions that weren't heart lesions. And Aubameyang has always sort of like he's had like like head-to-head meetings with previous president of Gabon, uh, Ali Bongo, and so it was like one of those things where like because they're treated differently, do they have true unity? And I never really felt like Gabon had that. But sometimes it feels like the rest of the team is unified, but maybe some of their best players, because they got special privileges, weren't part of the group in a sense. I don't think that's going to be the case anymore, as Ali Bongo has obviously been ousted under a military coup. So we're going to be curious to see how they do in terms of that aspect in Morocco. But I didn't like the way they defended, and that's why they're a tier three team for me. Zimbabwe, like Tunisia, normalization committee. They have a lot of experience, especially in midfield with like Marshall Munetsi, Marvelous Nakamba. These are very solid players that have played in Afcon before. Kama Biliat is still going strong, I think, even though he's without a club. And he's still a favorite of Zim fans. Divine Lunga is one of those left-footed center halves or left backs. Jordan Zamora is another left-footed fullback. Teenage Hadebe is a good center half. These are all players that have played Afcons before, have a lot of experience, are good players. Some have played in the Premier League. Some have played, at the top level in the CAF Champions League. Some are still playing at top level in French football. But I don't know anything about their coach, Tapera. He's a normalization committee coach, like the Tunisian coaches are normalization committee coaches. These random domestic coaches that you just sort of name so you can cut costs because you can't, get an approved budget to invest, like 30,000 or 40,000 in a monthly salary for a good coach. So I think they're just going to make up the numbers, unfortunately. And the last two teams I have are Zambia and Botswana. Zambia, hey, hats off because they got 6 points out of the last six in November. They beat Cote d'Ivoire. I really didn't think they would do that without, Daka, Sakala, and Banda. But they did. I mean, hats off to a player like Kennedy Musonda, a player I always thought was like unremarkable, but always very reliable. You know, especially with the attacking players. Sometimes you need to be in the right position at the right time. Remember, like a Dirk Kuyt or something like that. That Dutch player that played for Liverpool, where he's just like, what does he do? When you look at him, like you think you're more technical, you can dribble better than him. But man, he's always in the right place at the right time, making the right runs, scoring goals. Uh, Maybe I don't want to say Kennedy Musonda is like Dirk Kuyt, but maybe like that kind of attribute he has to him. But credit to players like Kings Kangwa, Stopila Sunzu is still going strong for Zambia at 35 years old in the heart of defense. I just don't know if they're gonna like. I have my doubts about them. They're like Guinea, like who else? Who else can I throw in there? There are teams that sometimes can win any match and lose any match, and I really put Zambia in that category. And finally, Botswana, as I mentioned, they just don't. I don't think they can score. I don't think they can threaten. Um, Most of their goals were scored through set pieces. And Baruti from Jwaneng Galaxy, the midfielder, he's a weapon from set pieces. But I liken them to Namibia at the last AFCON when I watched them. It's like they're gonna try to just defend, score on set pieces, but they have nobody that they can send through the defensive line with pace that can stretch the defense, that can, dribble past three or four players and get a shot on goal, in my opinion. But I like the fact that 4 or 5 of their starters do play for Joining Galaxy, the best club in the country, who plays in the interclub competitions at a fairly frequent rate. That's like, you know, El Ahly for Egypt, Sundowns for South Africa, Esperance for Tunisia. Sometimes when you have 4 or 5 starters that play at one club that are playing with the national team as well, you get a good amount of coherence and chemistry. It's like a little bit of a head start at times. So I like that, but I just think they're too limited, especially in attack. As much as I love Tumisang Oriboni, who he works hard, he sometimes feels very isolated to me. Not the goalkeeper made some decent saves, but man, he has a belly like me when I eat too much rice, and I'm not too sure about him as well. Plays for Joining Galaxy. Um, yeah, Botswana for me is one of those ties that I'm just not sure about. I don't think they're going to be troubling too many teams. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Wow, power ranked all 24 teams that made it to the Afcon. Morocco are the extreme favorites. For me, Botswana are probably going to be the worst. But remember, the Afcon is still 12 to 13 months away. I mean, we're still a very, very long ways away. So, um, still, so many things can happen. Injuries, coaches can get laid off if there's political problems. Uh, Other teams can recruit players, you know, like Morocco did with Brahim Diaz, for example. That could change all of these dynamics. But over the last 3 months, after watching a lot of these qualifiers, this is how I see the teams in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Anyways, one more reminder to go and subscribe to the Africa as a Country YouTube channel. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Guys, the CAF Champions League has arrived. Starting from next week, we're going to be dissecting the CAF Champions League. We're going to preview them on Monday's episode and then review all of the matches in real time as well. So, man, I'm very excited for that. I know all of you are as well. It was a really great AFCON qualifying campaign over the last 3 months. Now we can focus on the CAF Champions League and focus on World Cup qualifiers when March comes around. But until then, thank you for listening. It's been a very long episode of the African Football Roundup on the African Five-A-Side podcast. We'll speak to you guys very, very soon. Peace.